Here is our cycle count management agenda for today. So we're going to go through these various topics about what is cycle counting, what's the benefits of them, what I feel are keys to successful program, some ways to classify your inventory for counting, some configurations and planning, some of the journal types that are available in the system, and some reporting. So it's going to be pretty high level. There's a whole depth of information in here that I'm not even going to get to touch on today due to our limited time frame. And I am sticking with basic warehouse management. So for those of you that are on Dynamics, if you're using advanced warehouse management in the system, I am not touching on that capability today. I'm keeping it very simple. There are additional automation tools for cycle count management in the system under the advanced warehouse management. And so I'm not touching on that because I don't have a lot of clients using advanced warehouse. So just giving you the basics of what's available out of the box for basic warehousing is a great intro tool for today's session. Okay. So we're going to go on into what is cycle counting. So cycle counting is basically an inventory management tool where you count a subset of your inventory in specific locations. Now, when I say locations, I don't mean a specific bin. It could be a bin, but it could even be as large as a site, what we call a site in Dynamics, which might be a physical warehouse. It could be a physical, the entire location with all your warehouses, depending on how you set up your program and how granular you want to get. When I say location, I don't mean like a physical bin particularly. Depending on how granular you have inventory set up in your facility, this is all configurable and can be designed by you and your team. We want to count on specific days. Now, when I say days, I don't say you have to do it every day. That's my best practice recommendation is you do a subset every day, but this could be a weekly schedule, a monthly schedule, even a quarterly schedule, kind of depending on how you set up your program. And we want to make sure it's on a reoccurring schedule. So the best way to start a cycle counting program is to get people used to having a schedule of doing their accounts. So they do say that you could probably replace your year-end physical inventory by putting in a program like this. I haven't found that to be the case with most companies because most companies do want a once a year audit snapshot for their auditors that come in with a lot of the companies that I work with. But it can actually, if it's done right and it's well implemented, it can actually replace the need for a full physical inventory at year-end. And they're meant to be part of your daily operations. Like if you set this up right and you get it set up in a way that it's manageable on a daily basis, you shouldn't have to shut down an entire warehouse to go do an account. And so over time, you should be able to cycle through all your inventory based on some of the practices that I'll go through today. Okay. So what are the benefits? Obviously improved inventory accuracy, right? We want to improve our inventory accuracy by counting it more frequently. If my inventory is more accurate, I am going to also have operational efficiency. So if I have inventory that's not off and I have workers going back and forth trying to find inventory that the system says is there, but it's not there, I'm obviously going to make them more efficient if I'm cycle counting on a regular basis. And the next two bullet points kind of go hand in hand, right? If my inventory is more accurate, I have inventory to sell. If I can sell more inventory, it makes my customers happy and I have increased customer service. So all of these things all go hand in hand and are great benefits of putting in a cycle counting program. And then reduction in errors. So if you're counting on a regular basis, you're going to be able to catch those errors more quickly than if you weren't counting on a regular basis. If you just do a once a year physical inventory and you find that you made an error, a user made an error 6 months ago, it's harder to recoup that and to let that user know of that error. Whereas if you're actually counting on a more regular basis, you should see a reduction in user errors because you're able to catch those errors quicker and address it with the user and put a plan of action in place to correct their behavior. And then an obvious benefit is to decrease your inventory write-offs. And so you want to be able to show that you're counting your inventory accurately and you're not having as many write-offs to deal with. So those are some of the benefits of cycle counting. So these are some of the keys that I feel are very key to a successful cycle counting program. First of all and foremost, commit. You have to commit to putting this program in place and making it a part of your daily operations. I think it sometimes scares companies to think of putting this in place, but if you really get it up and going and you start small and maybe work your way into a bigger program, it's not as difficult as it seems. You also need a dedicated team of employees who are adequately trained on it. So they need to understand the software, they need to understand what they're doing in the software, why it does this, why it does that. And it needs to come from all aspects. So if you're the inventory manager, but you also need to work with the production manager to get those employees to count and so forth, or a warehouse manager, you all need to be on the same page. So it's really building that team of employees who are going to back you in this process. And then you want to ensure that process is well thought out and properly documented. And then make sure you have good training instructions so that your users know how to do this. Some of you might have some mobile barcoding solutions that you want to use some scan guns to do this. Others of you might have paper copies that you want to start off with. Hey, I'm going to print off a counting list and have them go count. Depending on which direction you go, make sure that you have adequate documentation for your users. It'll make the process much easier. I can't stress the next one enough. Perform your counts at the beginning of the day. That is always my best practice that I go into every client with, is that if you start off with small batches in the morning, make it something that's attainable to them. They should be able to get their counts done, and that should be the first thing they do every day, is they go in, they take 10, 15 items, whatever you determine that threshold to be, and they get those counts done, they get them out of the system. And the reason I say that is because the way Dynamics works is that it will lock your inventory while they're counting. And so you will not be able to post a sales order packing slip. You would not be able to post a sales picking list in the system. It's going to lock you up and say that item's being counted. I can't transact on this product. So that's why if you can get in the habit of doing it at the beginning of the day before your operations start and things get moving, it's a great way to get it into their schedule and get it ticked off the list. You want to do these in small batches, as I mentioned. If you do them on a daily basis and you do it in small batches as frequently as possible, it's going to absolutely help the cause to get this pushed through, and it's going to, obviously get your program up in place to decrease your inventory write-offs. As I mentioned, to avoid any errors, you're going to stall transactions that involve those items. The system does it automatically. It will stall your transactions. It won't let you process them while those items are being counted. So it's something to consider as you're setting up your program and you're looking to put a program in place. Okay, and then examine those errors. If you're finding a particular user is constantly writing something in or out incorrectly, this is a great way to track what those users are doing and to put a corrective action plan in place so that you can address it with that user and ensure that they understand the errors that they're making. And then lastly, make sure you have some metrics. You want to know basically, and there's some reporting in the system that we'll go through at the very end that can help you kind of gauge some of that. I wish they had a little more extensive reporting on the cycle count side, but there are some definite reports that you can use in there. But set up some metrics over time that you can help track your accuracy of your inventory, maybe which users are doing it, which, what's going up, what's going down, and so forth. All that's capability is in the system there and ready for you. So those are just some of the keys that I find going into clients and new implementations that I try to enforce as best practices when they're trying to determine whether they should set up a cycle counting program. The next thing I want to go into is 2 different ways that you can classify your inventory for counting. Now, neither of these 2 ways are required in the system. They're just available, and I want you to understand what their uses are. The first one that we're going to talk about is ABC classification, and then after we cover this, we will go into counting groups. And it's just different ways that you can group your inventory into buckets that you can query as you're creating your counting journal. And when we get down to the counting journal slide, I will go into the system and I'll show you how you can use these features to actually pull information into your journals. So the first thing is the ABC classification. So if you've never heard this before, you may have heard of the 80-20 rule. So there's a saying in the industry that goes 80% of your sales are comprised of 20% of your items. We call it the 80-20 rule. So if you think of an ABC classification, it gives your organization that flexibility to categorize your items into A, B, and C buckets by either 4 different values: value, carrying cost, revenue, or margin. That's called the ABC model. And then these values are held on the item record. So there's 4 fields for each of these ABC values. So if you think of A, B, and C, think of a teacher grading you. Obviously, A is the best, top of the class, right? So if you think of your A items, that first classification includes inventory items that are typically the highest moving items, the highest value items. They're going to have high turnover in your organization. Some of your raw materials might fall into this bucket. And so those are the items that you probably want to count the most. The next is the B level items. They're probably more items that are significant to your operation, They might have a larger group of these items. There might be a larger number of SKUs, but they're not as frequently used as the A items, so they probably don't need to be counted as often, but yet they would need to be counted somewhat frequently. So you'd want to classify them as your B items. So your C items are the class that will include inventorians that really have less movement. They carry a lower value inventory. I think of it as my slow moving list, right? This is the low hanging fruit. And so you may just want to count those as part of your year-end physical inventory if you still have that once you put this program in place, or you may want to count it twice a year. But it's probably those items that you just don't need to focus on as much because, like I said, they're the low hanging fruit. Okay, so this ABC classification, as I mentioned, is held on the item record. So I want to show you on the next slide is a screenshot I have of a periodic job that's available in the system. So for those of you that are Dynamics users currently, it's in the inventory management module, it's in periodic tasks, and it's called ABC classification. So it's a job that runs that actually will go out and do this classification. Okay, so when you click on that menu link, you'll get a right sidebar, which is the screenshot on the right. And this is where you can indicate your criteria of how you want the job to run. So there's a from and a to date, an annual interest in percent, which I'll cover in just a moment as we talk about a model of carrying cost. And then you have your A, your B, and your C, your highest, your middle, and your lowest. So basically, based on the ABC model of value that I have indicated in the screenshot, I want to take 80% of my items that are highest value, and I want to classify those as my A items. The next 15% are going to fall into my B bucket, and my lowest category is 5%. So what the system will do is it will actually go in and make all the calculations based on the cost records that are in the system, and it'll categorize your items, and it will do all the math for you basically by running this job. And then it goes back and updates the item record with that A, B, or C value in the ABC model value field, and we'll show that on the next slide.
And then, Lynn, we did have a question come through,
Okay.
and someone just asked, how often should the ABC classification be run?
Oh, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, there's a from and a to date. Now you can see in my screenshot, I have a from date showing for the beginning of the year all the way through August 31st of this year. And that's what I want my time frame to be. This is really up to you and how frequently you want it to run. Some companies will set it up quarterly, and at the end of every quarter, they'll reclassify their inventory. But as you can see down in the records to include, I've actually indicated an item number. You can see the P001 down here. I could run this on a specific period based on one item. If I left this field blank down here, it would run it for all items. So you've got the ability to filter out specific data. So let's say you had an item that was seasonal and it tends to spike up at a certain time of the year. Maybe you would adjust your from and your to dates, and you'd run it for that specific item during that time of the year, so that by value, you might want to count that more frequently during that time of the year. So it'll reclassify it, and it might bump it from a B up to an A, for example. So the from and the to dates are really something that you should talk about with your team and determine how frequently you want to reclassify your inventory if you choose to use the ABC classification. As I mentioned, this is not a required field, but it's a great field for filtering and being able to break down the criteria of your items. Also, I want to touch on ABC model of carrying cost. If you choose the ABC model of carrying costs, it's going to require the annual interest in percent. As everyone knows, as inventory sits in your inventory longer, there's a carrying cost to that. And so if you have an internal interest rate that you charge to your inventory to capture that carrying cost, you would want to add that interest rate in there so that when it runs the job, it will take your cost plus the interest, and that it will classify it according to that carrying cost interest rate. Okay. All right, so here is the item record in Dynamics, and you can see it's in the Manage Cost Fast tab for those of you that are Dynamics users. And this, I just picked this acoustic foam panel item number, and you notice that before I run the job, this is what it says. There's no value on any of these. So when you set up a brand new item in the system, ABC classification is always populated with no value. So once I run the job and I ran it for value, carrying costs, margin, and revenue, I ran it for all four of those, and you would have to run each of those individually, and it will go through and update those. Now, this item scored really high on all of them because I'm in a demo environment and it doesn't get a whole lot of sales activity. And so for me to get really good data, you're probably going to see these values a little more varied in your existing production environments when you run this job. But as you can see, for value, it classified it as an A item. Margin is a B, revenue A, and carrying cost A. So it automatically goes through and flushes through these values and populates them on the item records. Okay. All right, so let's move into counting groups. Counting groups are another way that you can use to classify your inventory in the system. And you can use these groups to actually be able to query and filter out. And as we get into the counting group journal down the line, I will go through these and show you how one of these work. So for example, you have the manual group. Okay, so for a manual group, there's really no settings involved here. And I'm referring to the counting code column that is in here. Okay, so for a manual group, it's just what it says, it's manual. You would assign items to a manual group when you manually want to run them. So there really is no automation here. It's just, I'm gonna assign them to a manual group. When they fall into this group and I run it by this group, it's gonna pull these items in, okay? Period is in days, okay? So when you see the days over here is 30 days. If I have items assigned to a period 30 counting group, it would evaluate them on a 30-day period. So let's say I ran a counting journal for today and I chose my period 30 items and it displayed them into my counting journal. If I go and run that tomorrow and I choose that same period 30, those items will not flow into that counting journal because the system will recognize that, hey, I'm only supposed to count them every 30 days. And so it will only pick up those that haven't been counted in the last 30 days. So that's the purpose of the period counting code on a counting group. Zero in stock. Lines are generated only when on-hand inventory reaches zero. So if I were to set up a counting group and assign those to items, it would only pull those in when the inventory has hit zero in stock. I don't see a lot of value in this one, but it's out there and available for people to use. Minimum, this one I can see some value in. So if you have an item in your inventory that has a safety stock level, and let's say it's set to 5 pieces, and that item falls below the 5-piece minimum, if you had a counting group set on this item set to minimum as the counting code, it would actually pull it in once you go less than your minimum. If you're at your minimum, it won't pull it, or yes, at or below your minimum, excuse me, at or below your minimum. It will pull it into a counting journal. So counting groups are really flexible. It's just another way for you to group your inventory. Again, come up with some name. I just used the counting code column as the naming convention. This is configurable for your company, however you want to name the groups and how you want to set those up. So you can set up as many of these as you want and make them as flexible as you want internally. Okay. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of configuration. So on the item record itself, in the Manage Inventory Fast tab, for those of you on Dynamics of the item record, there exists the ability to assign your counting groups. So this is where you can assign items on an item level to a counting group, okay? And this is where you could, and it's a 1-to-1 ratio, unfortunately. You can't have, it's not a 1-to-many, so you can't have more than one counting group assigned to an item. But that you have the ability to use to assign this counting group. And when we get into the journal, I'll show you how we'll use that group, okay? All right, so the other configuration item is your warehouse items. So how Dynamics works is that when you set up a brand new item, it sets it up for the warehouse value of all. And this will be the only record that you'll see in here. I've added in warehouse 11. If you store an item in more than one warehouse and you want to be able to count independently in those 2 warehouses without locking each other up, you would need to have a record for each warehouse on the item record in here. So let's say I have warehouse 11. Let's say I also store this item in warehouse 23. Okay, I would need to have the all value. This is a default. You can't actually delete this one. You'd have 11, and you'd also have warehouse. I'd also add in the record for warehouse 23 in here as well. And what this does is it gives you the flexibility by warehouse to potentially indicate different counting groups. So let's say in warehouse 11, it's my raw material. So I want to count it on a daily basis. So I might set up a period of 1 day type counting group, and I want to count these every day in this warehouse, for this particular item. But in warehouse 23, I might have a different counting group assigned to that one, because in that warehouse, it's really just a backfill warehouse. I don't need to count as frequently. I need to make sure my warehouse 11 is up to date. Okay.
And then we did have another question coming through.
Okay.
And it's, what happens if the warehouse item setting is missing?
That's a great question. If you don't set these up per your warehouses, like I mentioned, if I'm counting this in warehouse 11 and I also have it stored in warehouse 23, and warehouse 23 is not in this table of data, what'll happen is that if warehouse 23 goes to try to pack slip a sales order or pick a sales order, it will stop them and lock them up and say you can't because this item is being counted. If this becomes too cumbersome for you, I do want to show you in the system a way to turn off that global setting. So in inventory management, under the setup area, we have journal names. And here's all of our inventory journal names. And on the inventory journal names, like for example, I'm showing the inventory adjustment journal, you've got this counting registration policy. On the counting journal, it's the only one where it's editable. You can disable that counting registration policy, and then you don't have to maintain that warehouse items table. I recently had a client in South Dakota, they have warehouses across the state, and it was really becoming cumbersome for the item record person to maintain all these different warehouses in there. And so for them, they disabled that registration policy so they could count it in whatever warehouse and didn't have to have that restriction. So there is flexibility there if that becomes too cumbersome. It really kind of depends on how many warehouses you have, how spread out you are across a geographical area on whether you use that warehouse items table or not. Okay, great question. All right, so moving on, journal types, the counting journal. So we have the counting journal that helps you, this is a screenshot of the counting journal. It helps you count your on-hand inventory. You'll adjust things up or down. You can take your physical counts with this, and then you can post it at the end and you'd see those adjustments. Tag counting. Tag counting are basically used for companies that want to be able to count during business operations, but don't want to lock up their inventory. So what tag counting does is for every item, it issues so many tags and they're numbered. Like if I say issue 0 to 500 tags for all my items, it will give like item ABC, maybe 5 tag numbers. And you would take these physical tags, think of a physical tag like this, right? That I've got pictured here, and it's got a tag number on it. So I'm going to take that tag out, I'm going to go out and count my inventory, and then when I go back to my journal, I'm going to update my count on that tag number line in my journal. And what this does is it creates almost like think of it as a little sub-journal off to the side. So I can record all my counts into that sub-journal, and then when I'm ready to transfer them, I can transfer them and it pushes them back into a counting journal. And therefore, I can still continue to count throughout the day, but not lock up users. And I use that tag number and to ensure that I can capture all of my items and all the tags. One thing with tag counting, every tag has to be accounted for. So if you, like I mentioned, I issued 5 tag numbers for item ABC. If I only use 2 of the tags, the other 3 tag numbers would need to be voided in the journal just to ensure that you capture all your tag numbers. So basically it's just a way, I haven't heard a lot of clients using that, but it's a way to capture your inventory maybe while you're still doing some business activity during the day. All right, we're getting close on time, so I want to definitely show the counting journal capabilities in the system. So I'm going to come in here to inventory management, and I'm going to go into journal entries, item counting, and counting. All right, so here is the counting journal screen that opens up. You create a brand new journal. I always make it a pack to say best business practices to come up with a nomenclature for your users to use when they're counting. And so come up with a name so that when you go back and post this journal, you've got something to filter by. You can indicate the site and warehouse in here, but it's not required. And all of these fields are also optional in here. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to start a brand new journal. All right, when I have a brand new journal, I can just go and add a new line if I wanted to and just do a spot count maybe. That's an option in here at any time. But I also have the ability to query in lines. So there's a feature up at the top called Create Lines, and I can create my on-hand inventory. And here is similar to that screen at the beginning is where I can say, do I have any items that are set up to track size, color, style? Think of a t-shirt, you know, small, medium, and large. Here's where I can pull in my counting groups. As I mentioned before, you've got your manual, your month, maybe your 0 in stock, okay? So I can actually filter by a counting group and pull in on-hand inventory by a counting group. I could also down here in the records to include, I could filter on a specific item number that I want to pull in no matter what warehouse or location it's in. So I'm going to do that one first. So we're going to pop in here real quick, and I'm just going to say, all right, I'm just going to take item number T004. We'll just do this television. I don't have an ABC classification code to show. We'll show that next. And I'm going to hit OK. So I want to pull everywhere this item is located. I want to pull it into a journal. So I'm going to hit OK. And what you're going to find is you're going to see that item populate in the journal. And here it is. See how it populated the lines? It's from site 1, maybe site 2. This could be 2 physical sites in different locations on your property, or it could be 2 physical sites in different towns, depending on how you have your inventory structure set up. And it pulls in all your on-hand inventory, okay? So here's your counted column. So if I counted 9, you'd see no value adjusts here. Let's say this is showing a value of 1, but I'm like, oh, I don't have that one there. So I'm gonna count it as 0, and it's gonna adjust out a quantity of 1. Oh, yep, there it goes, a little delay. And this one is showing 0. There was a flag, I don't know if you caught it, but there was a flag that says include items with no on-hand inventory, and I had it set to yes, so it's gonna pull those in. You wanna be careful when you use that flag, because if you have a lot of items with no inventory, it could really clog up this journal. I typically turn that off. And here's an item for 250, and let's say I counted, there's 251. And you, oops, I put that in the wrong field, sorry. Go back one, 251. And you'll see that here's your adjustment column. You can actually specify what worker made the count. So if you wanted to, you could indicate, if you do the drop down here, it'll pull from the Dynamics worker table, and you could indicate what worker is doing the account on these. And you can even indicate some counting journal policies. Let's say you have a reason code, you want them to mandatorily enter on here when they're doing their counts, they have that capability as well. Okay, so I'm gonna just take, and if I were to post this, it would post these adjustments in the system. But due to some time constraints here, I want to definitely show you one more filtering capability. I see we're really running low on time. Hopefully I can keep you 1 minute over. All right, notice how I just went in, I could delete all the lines at once. So I'm gonna go to create lines, I'm gonna go to on hand, and this time I'm gonna choose my accounting group. Actually, I'm gonna do my ABC classification instead. So I'm gonna come down here, and remember how I classified that item I showed in my screenshot as an A item? So I'm gonna remove my item number in here. Oops. I'm gonna come down to my ABC value code, and I wanna say I wanna look for A items. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK, and I'm gonna run this now, and it's gonna pull in any items that have an A classification based on value on it. And notice that it pulled in that acoustic foam panel of my item that has an A value and has the on-hand quantity. So anywhere it was located. There's additional filtering you can do in there, and again, we're short on time here, but you can do all different kinds of filtering in that records to include screen. You can filter on a specific site, a specific warehouse, a specific location, lots of different capability options for on-hand inventory counting, okay? All right, so I'm gonna flip back quick to my presentation here, and the last thing I want to touch on is a little bit of reporting that's available in the system. So there's a counting history report that can show record by record what your adjustments were. If there was size, color, style, that would show up. So you can see what the on-hand was and what you counted. There's also the ability in the counting lines report in the system right from that counting journal I was on to print the journal, and you can actually remove the journal specific filter and show all the counts for a specific item number in there as well. And this will show the cost price and everything. So this is a nice way also to get some reporting out of the system.